I remember walking into some government meeting and I stood up and talked about the bastardization of the NEP. In my lingo, it means, this is not what the fathers wanted. And Najib happened to be chairing the meeting and he looked up and said something like, wow, you really have to improve your English, man.
Yes, he would have said it half in jest.
Half in jest, but you got the point. The Malay press said, wow, he called the NEP bastard.
Yes.
I got lynched.
Yes. Welcome back to the Are We OK podcast, where we talk about politics and public policies in ways that are accessible to you. My name is Kian Ming, or Dr. Bota, and we have...
I'm Peter, Mr. Money TV.
And we have a special guest with us here today, none other than Tan Sri Nazir Razak. Tan Sri, good morning and welcome to the Are We OK podcast show.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
Great to have you here, Tan Sri.
It's a real pleasure for us to have Tan Sri Nazir Razak here because there are a lot of things that we want to talk about. And Tan Sri, maybe I think most of our audience knows who you are, knows of your, of course, famous family name. But if you want to sort of like introduce yourself to maybe some of the younger members of our audience, how would you like to be known as or introduced as, in your own words?
Well, today, I guess, front and center is my current role as the chairperson of the Tun Razak Foundation. This is a foundation set up by the government primarily to preserve Tun Razak's legacy and to contribute to society, particularly in areas where Tun Razak was particularly prominent, like education, national unity, and poverty eradication. So that's the kind of primary position for today. But beyond that, of course, I used to run a bank.
Starts with a C.
For many years. Starts with a C.
Ends with a B. Yes.
Chinese, Indian, Malay bank.
That's good.
That's right, yeah.
And now I co-founded a private equity firm, so that's what I do to pay the bills.
It's a significant year for you, Tan Sri, because you turn 60 later this year, towards the end of the year. And it's also the 50th anniversary of not just the foundation, which also is, was started the same year as the passing of your father, Tun Razak, our second Prime Minister. What sort of feelings would you have going into this year, given these milestones that you are seeing ahead of you?
I think turning 50, one gets very reflective. I think, it's that stage in life where I think, there are not going to be many twists and turns.
Hopefully.
Your aspirations have become reality. And I think, your all the consequences of your decisions are already there. So it's I think I'm going to be very reflective this year. And I've already started kind of penning down some thoughts about my past, although, of course, I wrote my book a few years ago. But this will be more personal, I think, in terms of reflections of the past. And, of course, 50 years since my dad's passing, my dad's passing was a big part of my formative years. I mean, any psychiatrist would tell you that shapes you, losing your father at such a young age, using the guiding hand of a dad at a very young age, that shapes you. So I kind of reflect on those a lot this year.
You were 9 years old when your dad passed, and of course you wrote about it in What's in a Name, in your book. And you just showed us a picture of you representing the family at the establishment of the foundation, and Tunku Razali was the one who signed the foundation into force, so to speak. What memories do you have of that time when you were, dealing with all these, challenges and perhaps a bit of trauma as well?
Yeah, it's funny. At that age, I think you learn how to blank things out, how to compartmentalize, because you just got to get on. I think, in some ways, you build some internal issues, like, asking the question why, I'm the youngest of 5 brothers. So my elder brother is 4 years older than me. So it's sort of, why was I the one who had least time with dad? You have those kind of thoughts. But my mother had to bring up these 5 boys, and it was very tough. My mother she got married when she was 18. He was 10 years older than her, so it's very paternalistic, almost relationship between the two. So when he passed away, it was quite a burden on her to have to handle everything herself. So that I remember, it was tough.
Do you remember having to help your mother out in some specific ways?
Well, no, I kind of, moved into her room. So I spent all my time with her, kind of was there for her. And I think she took comfort in the fact that, I was always around, because the rest of my brothers had already, left home for studies and so on.
Boarding school.
And so on. And I think Najib had just started work. So he was around, but he was very busy. He went into politics straight away. So and of course I do recall the having to represent the family as a 9-year-old at this huge event to launch the Tun Razak Foundation, which is really quite bizarre. Sitting on the main table, it was quite bizarre for a 9-year-old. Yeah.
But you still remember it vividly in your mind?
Yeah. I do.
Okay.
I do. And it's how it's amazing to think that today I chair this foundation.
Yeah, and you're about to turn 60.
I was wondering, when you sat on that chair, what was the first thing that crossed your mind at the time, if you still remember?
I said, I shouldn't be here. I really said, I shouldn't be here. I'm 9 years old.
But I think it's also reflective of the kind of growing up that you had to do in terms of speeding up that process.
Yes.
Having to be there for your mother, and then also to see how your siblings, especially your brother, entered into various pathways. And then we'll talk about your brother and your relationship with him, and also your dad later on. But I want to go back into your father, Tun Razak. You spoke a little bit about it in what's in the name, but can you talk a little bit more about the values and principles that you sort of like imbibe from your late father when you had engagements with him and interactions with him?
Well, I was 9 when he passed away, so I don't really remember a lot about my time with him. I just remember kind of excerpts almost, him turning up to my birthday party, or him querying me about my results. And as I keep reminding people, at that time, travel was very time consuming, and he traveled a lot. So he wasn't home that much. So I didn't really get, that much kind of direct engagement with him. So my understanding of Tun Razak came later, from conversations with my family, his friends and associates, as well as reading about him. And when I wrote the book, as I was writing the book, I kind of realized that he had this huge influence on me as a person, from all that. Because he wasn't around, I probably, maybe wanted more to be like him, or to pick up things from him. And that's when I kind of saw that, I guess some of the things that was important to him. He used to remind us about, I remember this phrase particularly from him, which is, jaga nama baik, look after the good name. And he was very particular about that. So it made me very conscious about what other people thought at all times. We did live in this sort of glass bowl, if you like, growing up. Even our home, Sri Taman, was kind of open door. There would be days when there would be rombongan from the kampongs just coming in, walking around the house. and so we had to behave because people were watching. I'm very conscious about that. I think he was very conscious about service to the nation. He always, to him, and that generation, they were very much about, we are here to build this new nation out of what we inherit from the colonials, right? Whatever the borders they gave us, whatever, okay, let's forget about it. This is the nation we're trying to build. This is the mix of communities that we want to build a nation out of. So he was very focused, on service in that sense, building the nation in that sense. I think there are a lot of reference narratives about him, about his integrity in how he went about his responsibilities, both in terms of speech and also in terms of actions. There were these famous stories about how frugal he was with government money and so on.
And there was a story about, if I'm not mistaken, in your book about a swimming pool.
Yes.
Yeah, you want to say a bit more about
Well, I mean, we always remember that, as children, we wanted a swimming pool because many friends had started having swimming pool. It was a thing then to have a swimming pool in the house. And of course, we had this big government house, and there was plenty of room for swimming pool. So let's have a swimming pool. So we went to see him as brothers, and he got really mad. He practically slammed the table. He said, what will the people say? How can I use the people's money in such a frivolous way? So in the end of the day, I had to swim in this little pond, fountain pond with tadpoles. I pretended that was my swimming pool growing up. And I guess, and his leadership style also is something that I looked into, which is, he was this very consultative person, but at the same time decisive. Sometimes when people are consultative, they procrastinate. But he was consultative yet decisive. He knew the time for consultation, and he knew the time when you got to move. And those movements could be extremely bold. Like
the NEP, for example.
The NEP,
Yep.
Which
his visit to China and so on and so on. They were very, very, they were risky. And so, I took that from his personality. And then I guess, empathy was important. He really was very good. He wasn't a great orator, right? He couldn't rally crowds. But he was very good in terms of his substance. When he spoke, the content was very relevant to the listener. When he sat with you, you felt that you were the most important person in the world to him at that point in time. That was him.
Did you get a sense of what he was like as a statesman, as a prime minister, versus what he was at home? Because you were quite young when he became prime minister. How did that figure out? How did you figure that out?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, you kind of, you're born into your surroundings. You don't really know what else is out there. So there was this guy who was obviously,
Important
the
guy.
big boss,
Yes.
right? Wherever he went, he was the big boss. You knew that.
Yes.
But he was still your father, and you had access to him, and he will still be warm and tender with you, unlike how he was with other people. I mean, I think that was about it at that point in time.
And did you get a sense that because he engaged with you and your siblings, your brothers, in different ways, because you guys were at different ages, did you get a sense that he was perhaps paying more attention to some more than others in very specific ways? So, for example, grooming Najib for potential leadership roles in public service, for example. Did you get a sense
No.
of that? No. Okay.
No, because even Najib, when my father passed away, he was early 20s. He wasn't grooming Najib for politics per se. In fact, there were conversations at the time, and he was saying, maybe Najib shouldn't go into politics, maybe it should be Johari, that was the kind of things he used to talk about. And what I do remember most was my parents were both very particular about treating all of us the same way.
Wow.
And we had these family SOPs. So the first time you get to travel overseas was somehow when you were 9 years old.
Oh.
So I was always looking forward to turning turning 9 because that was going to be my first trip overseas. And then, of course, he died before. He actually had to cancel my first trip overseas because he had to go to London for treatment. Of course, he never came back. So that was one of the big disappointments of my life. My first trip overseas came very late.
So when do you remember when was the first time you went overseas?
It was about a year later.
Okay.
It was about a year later. I got to go to my brother's graduation in London.
Peter, as a father, I mean, I don't have kids. As a father, how would you relate to what Tan Sri has said?
So I myself, I can relate to it because my dad passed away when I was 14 years old. And prior to that, I think just like every boy, we were more of a mummy's boy, spend more time with the mum and stuff like that. Dad used to be more out there. And I think for me, at 14 years old, you start to develop this idea that, hey, maybe it's time to get to know my dad more, right? I think every kid have that age, right? You start observing your dad and what's my dad like? And unfortunately for me, when that time came, my dad passed away. So I can understand what Tan Sri is saying there. So my question to you is this. How do you think that episode of losing a dad, right, at that young age, and then later learning about him through third party, whether it's through writing and everything, and yet at the same time later, as you grow up, you become a man, having a family yourself, what are some of one or two takeaways that you see from him that you felt that, hey, I too want to be a man like that as a father? Yeah. Is there any particular one or two values or things that he do that you felt, yeah, I want to be like that man?
Well, he's quite unique in the sense that he was such a big figure, right? And the first struggle was, how do you try and emulate him, do I have to be Prime Minister to kind of, feel that I've
you got a big
kept
name,
up,
man.
right? So that was one of the things. And it took me some time to kind of say, actually, it was about service. It's about contribution in the best possible way you can. And I felt that, with my career, I managed to do that in finance, in banking. Right? So in that way, I got over that sort of, I need to be Prime Minister in order to be live up to him. For instance, that was one issue always, and I guess the other one was this whole thing about the good name. That became a little bit of a thing with me for a long time, and it was always about all the time conscious about what other people would say. That lived throughout.
Right.
Yeah, I will come back to the name part later. Maybe now we can talk more about Tun Razak's leadership style. You've talked a little bit about that already. And, for myself, through the various readings that I've had with regards to Tun Razak, the one impression that always comes through is he was somebody whom the civil servants feared. When he goes down to the district level, when he chairs meetings, because of his no-nonsense approach, I get the impression that he was very strict, and you've alluded to that as well. And he wants to get things done. He would not be somebody who took excuses very well. Do you think this is an accurate reflection of one aspect of his leadership style?
Well, I think they called him, some people termed him as the Commander-in-Chief of the Civil Service. And he was good at getting the best out of civil servants. And civil servants till today tell me that was the golden era of the civil service. And part of it is because he was a civil servant before he went to government. So he understood. He could put himself in their shoes and understand what makes them tick. Two is, I think, he wasn't that kind of strict in a sense of someone who's scary. Right? I mean, Dr. Ismail was scary. Yeah, Tun Razak is someone you wouldn't be too scared of engaging, if you like. And I think I would prefer the latter style of leadership, because if you're too scary, sometimes people don't tell truth to power. So you got to get that balance right. but he was so respected that people feared him also. He feared disappointing him. And I tell this story that just came to me a few weeks ago from Tun Musa, who was Assistant District Officer of Kluang when Tun Razak visited Kluang. And those days he had his red book. A red book is this document which existed all the way from Kampong, and they would be consolidated at the district, be consolidated at the state, and then consolidated in Tun Razak's office. So in this red book, they would detail, it'd be very detailed in terms of what are the development projects that are important, all the way down to jembatan or bridge or or a clinic or school,
roads
or roads or whatever, right? So when he went to the Kluang that time, each officer briefed him on the update from his last report of the red book for that area. And this one guy was saying, this clinic that was being built is 80% complete. And then the next guy would say, jembatan is this percent complete. So then he looked at it and said, okay, fantastic. So I will now visit the clinic. So the guy who had reported that the clinic was 80% completed just burst into tears, started shivering.
He panicked.
He panicked because he was lying. And he was going to be found out.
Okay.
And that's very powerful, right? Because you can't investigate, you can't look at everything.
Yes.
But you pick.
Yes. And I think he sensed that there was something wrong.
Yeah, and so that story goes around the whole country. So now everyone says, we better not bullshit this guy because he might just check on you, right?
Yes. Wow.
But the fear was there. I think the fear, the disappointment, the embarrassment of not delivering for Tun Razak. Yeah.
Wow.
Of course, at some point there were consequences, like he would transfer people or whatever. But
Yeah, and at the time, Kluang was still considered a little bit of a red spot.
Yes.
There was still some communist activities there.
Very
things
much so.
like that.
Very much so. So these kind of things were very important to him because he learned his anti-poverty drive from the British war on against the communists. So it was about hearts and minds, about development.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a fantastic story. And Tun Musa only told this story to you quite recently.
A few weeks ago, yeah.
Wow. Okay. That I think should go into your next book. So you mentioned a little bit about his views towards poverty eradication, and I think one of the most memorable and also important contributions he had was, the drafting of the new economic policy and then the subsequent implementation. And that took place also, after his death. How do you think his approach towards leadership and nation building shaped his understanding of the NEP?
Well, first and foremost, Tun Razak grew up poor. It is not well understood because he was born into an aristocratic family
In Pekan.
in Pekan. But his father left him. He set up another family in Riots, right? So my father, he had one other sibling. They got left in Pekan, and then my grandfather had a family of 14 kids in Riots. So they grew up with their grandfather, and so he does write about. He spoke about growing up, going to school barefoot, 7 kilometers a day, and so on and so forth, and bathing in Sungai Pahang, looking after kerbau and stuff like that. So that was his childhood. So he one of his missions in life was to address rural poverty. It was very, very important to him. That was the real mission, right? To uplift the poor. So that was very much what drove his career. I think his whole career was about, to him, nation building was delivering for the rurals. And in terms of the NEP, people forget that it's two-pronged. The poverty eradication and the rebalancing
Of society.
society. And what people forget also was that new economic policy was well accepted across communities. Michael Chen used to talk about how there would be no Malaysia without the NEP. Because what happened was unfettered capitalism of the first 12 years of our history increased the divide between the rich and the poor.
Yep.
And of course, the rich were the Chinese. And in 1970, the Malays, which was 50-60% of the population, owned 2% of corporate wealth. It was not sustainable.
Yep.
So if you don't have that balance, how are you going to build a nation?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it was almost, NEP was kind of a kind of pause, a 20-year pause, and kind of saying we need to rebalance this before we start rebuilding the nation. Yeah, and we need to use government to rebalance it, and then we start building the nation. That was the plan. So of course the problem was so much vested interest was created, and nobody wanted to get rid of the NEP, right? And so this was unfortunate. But that was very much the thinking about NEP, and it was not a document that Tun Razak wrote himself or with Tun Ismail. They had the National Consultative Council. And that council, you cannot get minutes of the discussions, right?
Oh, I wasn't aware.
Yeah, you cannot get minutes because it was,
OSC?
it was gloves off. You can do whatever, you can say whatever you want to say in those meetings, yeah. And they were,
Robust discussions,
robust,
I'm sure.
very, very robust, to basically say why was May 13th and what do we do about it. And that's when this whole thing came out. And it was 67. The original one, when he announced the National Consultative Council, he announced 65. And then the women were jumping because there were no women. So he appointed 2 women. So it became 67 people. And representing, all communities and sections of society and all that. But he forgot the women.
Yep.
He got into deep trouble.
Oh, yes.
So that was how they arrived at this NEP.
We'll come back to the May 13th riots in 69 and then the implications of that. But maybe I want to push a little bit more on the implementation of the NEP. I think we're all aware of some of the pros and cons in which the way it was implemented. I think in terms of the impact on education access for the Malay community, I think that is an undoubted success. Tan Sri Wahid actually talks a lot about how he benefited from the NEP from education standpoint, and I'm sure that there are many, many, many more others like him. But on the capital allocation side, in terms of wanting to create a Bumiputra entrepreneurs and allocation of resources in that ecosystem, we probably saw a lot more of that happening in the 1980s under Tun Mahatir. How do you think Tun Razak would have looked at the implementation of the NEP and some of the ideas that Tun Mahatir had with regards to creating this Malay capitalist class?
I think he'd been quite disappointed with the implementation of the NEP in many respects. I think that even early on, he set up many agencies, this UDA, Bank Bumi, all these agencies.
And he created Felda as well.
Felda and many, to basically, use the full force, full might of the state to help rebalance society. I often tell the story about, and it's not well known, but as he was dying in London, he prayed for a few more months to live. And he specifically said, I need to address the extent of corruption that's seeping in. Right? And I do think that when they created these various agencies and all that, they did not do enough in terms of the anti-corruption platform. I think they created the ACCA and so on and so forth, but definitely not strong enough. Yeah, so that was always an issue. And we can always, I know in your political life you were always reflected on, or at least your party those days, you always reflected on Malaysia's GDP per capita in the late 70s, right? Was the same as Korea, same as Taiwan, and the divergence is enormous.
Sure.
Right? So you can blame on many things. Yeah, but definitely we should really have a good analysis of what happened after 1980. Right? And one of the issues, of course, is how they perverted the NEP. And I think it was driven by political contestation. Right? When within UMNO, they started to use the NEP for political purposes. You know, the awarding of contracts and the awarding of shares, etc., were done with political intent. Yeah, so I had issues with that. In terms of Tun Mahathir and Tun Daim, you know, and I never doubt Mahathir's intentions. I question his methods. So he wanted to create the Malay entrepreneurs, the Bumiputra billionaires, and so on and so forth. The problem is how to, right? You can't just pick people because they work for Tun Daim and say that they must be good, so therefore give them plus, right? So these people, easy come, easy go in a way. And I think they didn't, their businesses were not robust enough and got found out in the Asian financial crisis when most collapsed. You know, so you reflect on the early 90s when we had this super economic growth, which is great, but you know, you're driving growth because of injection of foreign capital. And that capital, a lot of it was misallocated. And therefore, when the crisis came, we got found out. These companies all got found out. Yeah, that they were a lot of them were empty shells. The valuations were not couldn't be backed up. So therefore, you know, we had this financial crash during the crisis, which was far more severe than the Singapore's or many other countries. Yeah.
Would it be an accurate reflection or comment to say that Tun Razak was a firm believer in institutions? I mean, he created a lot of them. If he had more time, he probably would have strengthened a lot of them. Whereas Tun Mahathir was not necessarily a strong supporter of institutions. He may have wanted to use those institutions for his, larger nation-building purposes, without necessarily strengthening them in terms of capacity and resources and staffing. Do you think that's an accurate reflection?
Mahathir was, he didn't really have much time for those kind of details.
Okay.
He basically was in a rush and thought that he knew best.
Okay.
And as I said, I never doubted Mahathir's intentions. It was just he didn't really respect checks and balances. To him, some of this was time wasting. Tun Razak was a lawyer. Tun Mahathir was a doctor, right? Tun Mahathir would just like to cut things off.
Yes, and very prescriptive.
Tun Razak would figure out ways to argue his way around, right? So this was the difference. Mahathir did a lot of good things, but overall, I think he didn't spend enough time in terms of the institutions and the long-term foundations.
Going back to this kind of difference in leadership style, you mentioned that your late father was a person who actually consulted a lot and at the same time was also decisive. How do you think was his approach, based on what you've read and spoken about to others, in terms of managing the cabinet during the emergency after the riots of 1969, including trying to get the NEP and other policies passed and enabling this National Consultative Council?
You see, I think one of my father's great strengths was he knew his own weaknesses.
Okay.
Right. And again, today when I talk to next gen, that's one thing I always highlight. You must know your own weaknesses. What was the first thing he did when he was appointed dictator? He basically, after May 13th, initially Tunku wanted to hand over to the military. And then he was told, if you hand over to the military, you're not going to get it back. So he then said, okay, I think I better create this, a kind of executive council with military and civilians and so on. So he said, then we set up Mageran under Tun Razak and gave him absolute power. So he ruled by decree. He was a dictator for 22 months. So what's the first thing that the dictator do? He appointed by his side Tun Dr. Ismail, right, who was a tough, no-nonsense guy and had been his direct competitor. They challenged each other for deputy president of UMNO in the late 50s. So they were competitors. The first thing you do, you appoint a competitor. Most leaders since, they get a competitor, they cut. They get anyone who could challenge them, they remove. Right? He appointed someone who was his direct competitor. And there are a lot of stories about how, they had this. It was a partnership. They were equals in many ways. And I know even in terms of how he treated anyone else in meetings, etc. He would very much defer to Tun Ismail's views. So then he realized that, look, I'm a dictator, but I need checks and balances. I need good advice. I need people who are not scared to talk back to me. And again, when he gave up dictatorship, when he handed back power to parliament, he made a statement. He said, look, too much power is no good. And whilst you might be able to control yourself, but can you control the people around you who are doing things in your name?
Yes.
Yeah, he made that statement as he was handing back power to parliament. Yeah. So what that means is that he was good at listening, getting advice, creating an inner circle of influence that made him better. Yeah, and within government, there's still the ICU, the Implementation Coordination Unit, that he set up, which helped him implement various projects and help him do the oversight. A bit like a Pemandu, I suppose.
Yeah, the original
original Pemandu. And also when you look at the team around him, very capable, Oxbridge civil servants, Oxbridge graduate civil servants, etc. And I do know that he actually had a process where he would submit names through them, right? They were like his HR unit, right, for developing leaders. Leadership development was very important to him. You look at the development of careers like, to Musa Hitam, Razali, Rafida, etc. Again, he invested time in developing their careers, making sure they gain the right level of experience and so on. And the good story, another good story is Rafida Aziz.
Yes.
Rafida Aziz was a lecturer
in UM. Teaching economics, if I'm not mistaken.
And one day she participated in a march, a demonstration against the idea that the Agong was going to get a second wife. So the whole bunch of ladies marched into Sri Taman to meet Tun Razak. And when they met Tun Razak, he kind of said, he was sometimes could be quite paternalistic or whatever. He kind of sort of said, why don't you ladies go back and look after your husbands or something like that.
Okay.
So Rafida just fired back in the usual Rafida way.
Yes.
And then, of course, after that, she gets invited to join politics and government, right? So he's like promoting someone who talks back to him. Again, that's a leadership strength. Whereas mostly they will say, okay.
Yeah, I don't want to see you ever again.
Someone will call you tonight.
Yes. Well, I mean, this is really fascinating. Where do you think he got this from? Is it through some of his mentors in Malaysia? Was it when he was in the UK, when he was studying after the Second World War for his law degree? Maybe he was also quite active in the Labour Party in the UK.
Well, I think in terms of some of his policies and approaches to government, he was obviously influenced by the Fabian Society and so on. So much so that, there's a whole story about later on how some segments of UMNO accused him of being communist, right? Socialist, communist, and so on. I think in terms of the leadership skills, not sure. But I suppose, a Malay college
yes.
and, responsibilities as during the war and so on. I mean, during the war, his studies were cut short during the war, and he had to be a spy for the Brits during the war. So all this.
Do you think he perhaps looked up to some of the British prime ministers? When he was there, I think it was Clement Attlee, just after Churchill and after the Second World War. And then later when he became prime minister, I think it was Harold Wilson who was the prime minister around the same time as well. Any insights or any stories about that?
I think the one where he often, my brothers were telling me, the leader he often mentioned most was JFK.
Oh, okay. And there's a picture of JFK.
He went to visit. He actually met JFK a few months before the assassination. And again, if you look closely at the photograph, he was giving JFK as a gift a caress. Now, any culture will tell you that's not the best present.
Yes, correct. Indicates a certain sort of aggression, perhaps.
Yeah, it's bad luck.
Yes.
a few months later, the guy gets assassinated.
Yes.
But anyway, I think clearly JFK captured the imagination, right? This new generation, and he was bold, visionary, send a man to the moon and so on. So I think he did capture Tun Razak's imagination, that kind of leadership.
But a leader with a very different kind of public persona compared to your father.
Yes. I mean, this is, sometimes you look up or you get excited about people who are not like you.
Okay. Tan Sri, if there was a modern political leader, and modern, however you want to define it, maybe somebody who led a country after 1980, whom would you think would most reflect the ideals and aspirations of Tun Razak, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always dangerous to kind of associate him with any other leader per se. But let me look at the domestic context. After Tun Razak passed away, 76, Tun Hussein On became a leader, and they were same age, contemporaries, and it was a kind of continuum of Tun Razak. Then we had Mahatir, we had Badawi, and during that period we also had Musa Hitam and Tengku Razali and Ghaffar Baba as key players in the whole leadership equation for Malaysia. All of them were so-called Razak boys. They called themselves Razak boys. They were trained by Razak, developed by Razak as leaders. And the first Razak, non-Razak boy to lead the country was Razak's son, actually, ironically.
Okay.
But of those Razak boys, it's quite interesting to understand the similarities and differences between them and Tun Razak. And too long to go into, we talked about Mahatir earlier. Pak Lah had many similarities with Tun Razak, ex-civil servant, etc. But probably the one who I think was most aligned was probably Tun Musa. And I think he's probably the best prime minister we never had. And I feel that Mahathir was PM for 22 years. Maybe we should have been kind of Mahathir for some, Musa for some, Razali for some, and then Pak Lah, right? Then I think things would have been quite different. Yeah.
They would have had their own leadership styles and also approaches, and probably different kinds of institutional changes would have happened under each of them.
Correct.
Yep. Peter?
As you were growing up and you were witnessing all this, Tan Sri, I bet you get a sense of like a lot of things that your dad, Tun Razak, was trying to do, and when you see it being implemented, like you mentioned earlier, you agree with the intentions but not the methodology. As an heir of Tun Razak, right? How did you felt sitting on the sidelines, and you're not in politics, watching on the sideline in the private? what was that emotion like? You know, how do you dealt with it?
I was frustrated and annoyed every time I would hear his name used in vain, if you like. Especially, sometimes, and I keep, even one of my key themes for Tun Razak Foundation this year is to shift from, make sure we remember that the most important part of Tun Razak's legacy was his values and methods, not the tangible policies and institutions that he set up. Those were relevant for the time, may not be relevant for today. And so don't just say, we need to keep this because this was Tun Razak's. But Tun Razak did it because that's what Malaysia needed at the time. If you don't need it anymore, get rid of it. And I think Tun Razak would have imagined that, his policies were relevant for the time. And then after that time, you guys sit around, have your National Consultative Council again and come up with what's relevant for your time. Right? And there were many occasions when I spoke out against this kind of misinterpretation or misimplementation of the NEP and got myself into a lot of trouble. I remember one day at some MCA or event, I think, I stood up and talked about the bastardization of the NEP. In my lingo, it means, this is not what the fathers wanted. So, of course, the Malay press said, wow, he called the NEP bastard.
Yes.
I got lynched.
Yes. That would have been challenging.
I remember walking into some government meeting and Najib happened to be chairing the meeting and he looked up and said, something like, wow, you really have to improve your English, man.
Yes, he would have said it half in jest.
Half in jest, but you got the point because the Malay press were really up in arms, right?
Wow, wow. And then during that time, you were a banker and you initiated and you led the whole CIMB. It was a lot of merger and acquisition and stuff like that. I was just wondering, maybe I'll share with you a little bit of my impression of a CIMB during that time because I was a student and we saw the whole CIMB came about and things like that. I remember when it first happened, all this merger, I was thinking to myself, oh, that is a Bumiputra-oriented bank, right? It would felt a very traditional kind of thing. But later when I started working, after about 5-10 years later, I actually had many friends who work there. And many of them are very well-educated people, very, very elite people who graduated very well and very smart people. And it became a whole different entity. It wasn't what I imagined it to be. I would have thought of it more like a government bank, that's my impression back then as a student. But subsequently, it wasn't. I bet when you were reading about your dad, looking at all this, and while you're not in politics, but you get to lead your very own little circle there, how much of what you think Tun Razak wanted to do was something that you brought into CIMB and kind of, accomplish that little piece of that story? Yeah.
Well, that's a great way of looking at it. Thank you for saying that. I mean, I think, there were definitely elements of that. And I think, we wanted a merit-based organization. But then we realized that, one needs to give more opportunities for, the less fortunate. In many cases, the Malays who didn't have, enough educational access, for instance. So, to me, you can give some preferential access, but once you're there, you've got to compete. You teach them to compete. You teach them to be the best possible, and you don't demotivate people for doing very well or for excelling. That was key, and I think to a large extent we achieved that. Sometimes when it comes to the intake, we gave some preferences to balancing the ethnic makeup. But once they're there, you better as hell, do as well as the other. Otherwise, you're not going to survive. And the earlier joke about Chinese, Indian, Malay bank, I was very proud when I first heard that story. Yes, this is the Malaysian bank. Very, very proud when people said that. And, your initial impression may have been formed when we did a hostile takeover of Southern Bank. Then, the narrative out there in some quarters was this Malay government-backed entity was taking over or, getting rid of this dynamic Chinese entrepreneurial bank. And you had that kind of accusations thrown at us. But I think, once we integrated and the Southern bankers worked for us and all that, that went away very quickly.
We'll come back in the next part, the final part, and talk about Tun Razak's influence on your own leadership style and also your brother Najib Tun Razak's leadership style. We've had a preview already in terms of what you said just now, so we'll be right back. Welcome back to the final part of this very, I think, interesting interview with Tan Sri Nazir Razak, the chairman of the Tun Razak Foundation, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. And Tan Sri is also celebrating his 60th birthday this year. I hope I will be invited to at least one of the parties. Now we want to shift the conversation to, maybe one can say the elephant in the room, who is, none other than your brother, our former Prime Minister, Najib Tun Razak. He was, if I'm not mistaken, 17 years old when Tun Razak passed away, something like that.
A bit older.
A bit older? Okay. How do you think your late father influenced his leadership style, when he first joined politics and then subsequently, his development as in the political arena all the way until he became Prime Minister?
Well, I think certainly all of us were influenced by our father to some extent. I think, Najib's commitment to service. Initially after my father died, there were questions whether he was too young. But he basically felt that was his responsibility to take over the Pekan constituency. So when my father died, he was about 23, I think. So then within a year, he was contesting he took over my father's seat. So one service. Then I think in terms of approach, it was a different era. So I know, people talk about Najib's time, Pemandu, external injections into the civil service and so on and so forth. But I think given the way things had evolved, particularly with the shift from government to private sector, etc., a lot of the new generation of high flyers preferred to do business and so on. So I think that there was a need to bring in consultants and private sector into the mix. And Najib, at the beginning, I reflect back on 2009 when he first became PM. One Malaysia, I think it's One Malaysia Performance Now or something like that, right?
People First Performance Now.
People First Performance Now.
I still remember, it was a good tagline.
Fantastic tagline. And it was actually a very exciting time.
Yes.
And he was very determined to transform Malaysia. And if you think about the new economic model, he basically brought in people like, Amir Sham, Andrew Sheng, a whole bunch to help him put together this new economic model. And, until a few years ago, I remember even Nurul Izzah was talking about the new economic model and the needs-based affirmative action that he had articulated in that new economic model. It was a great document to me.
Yeah. I still have it in my
then
laptop.
It wasn't implemented. Politically, he couldn't implement. But the problem was, having articulated this transformation, it was a big political gamble for him. Needs-based affirmative action means essentially reducing the privileges for Bumiputra, right? And at the expense of his political base in UMNO. Yeah. He bring in all these consultants and all that to support the civil servants. not well.
Yeah, not well received.
Not well received amongst the civil servants who were huge voters.
Yep.
Right? And, his KPIs for ministers and all that, not easy to bring about these kind of changes. And of course, I kept saying to him at the time, I remember, whenever I saw him, I kept saying, so look, you've got to implement this. And he said, yes, I want to. The economic model is there, but I need my own mandate. Don't forget, he never had his own mandate. He took over from Pak Lah.
Yes.
In midterm.
Yep.
Then he needed his own mandate, then he would implement. Then came 2013.
Yes.
And when 2013 came, I was sitting next to him when he wrote the Chinese tsunami.
Yes.
And I think, please don't. But of course I have no say. I was just looking. But I was like praying, please don't. And he put that, and that was irreversible. Right? Then he made that statement. But in many respects, whether it was truly reflected in the numbers, but the fact was, it represented his view that he was the most progressive in that sense, right? And he wanted to rebalance. Don't forget, One Malaysia is also rebalancing, right? It's kind of saying, we're all Malaysians, right? And he put all this at the discomfort of his UMNO base, and yet in the GE, he did badly. And UMNO support also came down. Chinese support also came down. And then he changed course after 2013. So look at it however you want, but that's the fact. That he felt he wanted to transform Malaysia, he wanted to rebalance it, he wanted to pull back some of the extremes of the new economic policy, but it got rejected at the polls. And the only way he felt after that, the advice given to him was, we've got to double down.
Go back to your base.
Go back to your base, double down on the Malay nationalism. So that's I think, how what happened to that course, this transformation course, which I found very exciting. So of course, after 2013, the direction of things didn't quite jive with me.
Yes, and we'll talk about that. But maybe I share a personal story. I'm not sure whether Peter knows this as well. I was also very excited about the GTP and the ETP, the Economic Transformation Program, the Government Transformation Program. I had been to some of the labs. I used to work for BCG. They were also one of the lab owners working under Pemandu. And I really saw this very compelling story that Idris Jala was trying to tell. I saw some of the projects, the River of Life, really fantastic idea. In fact, I'm still trying to advocate for it until this day. And somebody, and I was at UCSI at that time, UCSI University, and somebody in the UCSI ecosystem was actually pitching to me that I should join Najib's office as some sort of, not advisor, but a person who could help in that ecosystem, maybe present different kind of voice for the Chinese community coming from the kind of background that I had. I don't know why. I mean, even though there were all these good things that was being done, something at the back of my mind said maybe better for you to chart your own course. And that was when I took a look a little bit deeper at the ETP, the GTP, good numbers, but maybe the implementation part a bit skewed towards large corporates and things like that. And that was when I decided to join the DAP in 2012. And 2013, partly because of this tsunami, so to speak, and also lowering of the Malay vote share for BN, I was elected as the Member of Parliament for Serdang. So that, and I remember, the headlines, apa lagi Cina mau, things of that nature. So when I reflect upon that, I can see how Najib would have felt. Maybe just one last thing. I think Najib, and I think rightly so, he felt that the Chinese business community was with him. And to this day, I hear from the Chinese business community, especially the big corporates, to say that Najib was a much more pro-business prime minister compared to others that have come subsequently. And they long for those days, or at least parts of it. But somehow this wasn't translated to the ground, meaning your Chinese SMEs and others within that ecosystem. And I think probably a good reminder to the current government that these are things that you need to be aware of, and this may have an implications in the upcoming polls, maybe later this year or early next year. So that's a bit of my spiel. Going to Najib, you mentioned, after 2013, things didn't go quite right. And of course, we all know now about the 1MDB scandal. How do you think, where do you think Najib went wrong in terms of his own leadership approach that led him down this 1MDB rabbit hole? Because to me, it's very inconsistent with the values that was espoused by Tun Razak. Being frugal, service above self, taking care of the country before your own needs and things of that nature. How would you square that circle?
I think ultimately it was the circle of trust that developed around him. And you are your circle of trust in the end, right? You can't say, it was the circle of trust's fault. You are your circle of trust, and it was a circle of trust that developed around him, which evolved. It evolved over the years. I remember I saw it at the beginning, and then how it evolved. So you had a situation where some of the characters, which obviously included Jolo,
yes,
right, and their influence on him. I don't buy this Tommy Thomas argument about alter ego and so on and so on. I don't. It wasn't like that at all. It was just a convenient thing. It was the influence that these people had, and also influence to the extent of not providing access to sensible voices. Right. And I think by then I could only see him by appointment in the office. Okay, so my relationship with him also evolved. So if I wanted to see him, I had to get an appointment in the office. I couldn't drop by my brother's house. It just wasn't happening anymore. So that I think ultimately.
How did you feel about that? I mean, did it pain you?
No, because I understood, because I was a little bit of a pain. Because I spoke my mind, and there were GLC government. I ran a GLC. I tell you, Najib and I kept very separate careers until 2008. I remember the night I went to his house. He'd just been appointed Minister of Finance, and I was telling him I was a bit upset because now it's going to be uncomfortable because my brother is my boss, effectively, right? And I've been running a GLC, and people are going to think I'm appointed because of him. But I've been running a GLC for donkey's years. And, even after that, people used to say, oh, you're only there because of your brother. I'm like, yeah. So then, there were GLC meetings. They used to have this G20 where Khazanah used to organize all the big GLCs meeting and all that. And, I was, from then on, quite outspoken. I remember there was a meeting when I questioned what was going on at this thing called 1MDB, which had somehow or other not had to comply with the G20, which is all the leading GLCs. 1MDB didn't have to come. Petronas didn't have to come. Felda didn't have to come. So the rest of us had to come. So I said, look, there are all these other entities out there doing their own thing and doing not so good things, and we get tainted by the same brush. We should bring them all in here and be accountable. And I remember, after I said that, you could hear a pin drop. And I remember coming out of the meeting, and a couple of GLC, the two people sitting next to me said, just promise me you never sit next to me again. Because I don't want the Prime Minister to be looking at us like that. And these people who know who they are, and they're doing very well today.
Obviously, because of your high profile running of GLC, the second largest bank in Malaysia, that puts you in situations where you were in the same room as your brother in his capacity as Minister of Finance, and then later Prime Minister. How about your other brothers, the three of them? How did they feel about this 1MDB thing and the impact that it had on the family name?
Well, they're much more private about it. I mean, I think, we're kind of all in this, we were, I mean, it's recorded in the book that we were on the same page, in a sense that we all went to see him and expressed our concern about what's going on.
Okay, understand.
I think the one thing I think one must remember is that Najib has a very long career.
Yes.
And during that career, as we reflected just now, when he first became PM and some of the stuff that he tried to do, I think were absolutely on point,
Yes.
right? Then you have this unfortunate 1MDB debacle and the consequences of that. I think one needs to spend time to kind of understand what actually happened and whether there were systemic issues, etc., and whether justice is currently properly being served in this whole context of things, right? And it's I think it's important to reflect on that, and also reflect on why Najib remains very popular.
Yes.
Right, and his deep connection with the Rakyat and so on. I think it's far more complicated than saying, Najib was responsible for NBB, blah, blah, blah. And, he's already publicly made a statement to say that it happened under my watch, and I'm sorry. And I think that was the right move, because definitely it happened under his watch, and he needs to take accountability for it. Then the question is, what is he culpable of? That's a much more complex question, right?
Yeah, and even before he became Prime Minister, if I'm not mistaken, he was the youngest Menteri Besar of Pahang. He was the youngest member of Parliament. I'm not sure who currently holds the record because it's either him or Lim Guan Eng, one of those two. I think Guan Eng became a member of Parliament for just after he graduated from his studies in Australia. And he was the Minister of Education in the 1990s. I remember he was the person who passed the Private Higher Education Act that led to the growth of the private universities and college ecosystem, which has benefited many in Malaysia today. Later on, Minister of Defence and so on and so forth. So you're right, Tan Sri. There's a long record of public service there, and perhaps somebody could document that and put that in the right context. To be fair to Najib, in terms of his entire corpus of public service to the country and how he is contributed to it, and not just focus just on 1MDB. Important, but it shouldn't define his entire political career.
It's also, you must remember that I remember Azman, Mokhtar and a few
Khazanah,
others.
yes.
Khazanah used to tell him and say, "You got your government transformation, you got your economic transformation, but where is the political transformation?" Right? It's a three-legged stool, and if you don't fix the politics will then bring down the other two, right? Which is actually what happened.
Yeah.
In the end of the day, there was this rapid decline in support for Barisan, the incumbent, the dominant party. It's almost inevitable, right? In a way, you look at LDP, Congress, etc., and he was fighting against that. And I guess the whole 1MDB story is intertwined with that struggle as well.
So that's a very good point that I just want to unpack a little bit more, in the sense that one of the reasons why I think Najib felt he had to have access to his own funds through 1MDB is to continue to have support within UMNO. It's well documented, many UMNO politicians and BN politicians and others in the ecosystem benefited from some of these 1MDB related largesse. How do you think he could have done this differently in terms of trying to hold on to that political support? And how do you think our country can move forward with regards to, let's say, Political Financing Act and other more systemic changes in this area?
Well, I've talked about this quite a bit in terms of the need for a kind of National Consultative Council 2, a kind of national reset. If we look at our makeup today, one can really question whether we have a system that's suitable for Malaysia, right? And we also have institutions like the monarchy, for instance, that could do more, right?
Challenges with Sabah and Sarawak.
And challenges with Sabah and Sarawak and all that. So why don't we have this national conversation? And I talk about this national conversation all the way to when are we going to be born Malaysians, right? Why? At what point? 2050, 2040, 2060, right? Why don't we lock that down, that date, and then we all work towards that date? And then when are we going to go to school together, right? When are we going to integrate vernacular and national schools, right? If you look at the school, think about Tun Razak. I think the Razak education report was flawed in the sense that he envisaged that the national system will be so strong that it will dominate. When actually what happened was the national schools, were mismanaged, and therefore the vernacular schools became the preferred schools for non-Malays and Malays to some extent, right? So all this needs to relook at. But we're never going to be a nation if we don't go to school together.
Yeah.
Right. So these are issues that I think it's time that we relooked at. And relatedly, your Political Financing Act, this reform will need to reduce the power of the Prime Minister, right? And relook at where, if you want to do what is political financing? Political financing is transparency of financing of political parties, right? You're not going to get transparency if the Prime Minister is full control of the enforcement apparatus, right? So if you're really going to be serious about it, you need to relook at this whole thing. What is the reporting line for MACC, and so on. Even LHDN, right? When during the height of my queries against 1MDB, I was threatened by LHDN also, right? Not by LHDN, or rather someone threatened they'd use LHDN against me, and get my tax audited and stuff. These are the kind of things were being used at that time. And I don't think the system has changed since. So real systemic reform is needed. I think some people say, do we still need it now or whatever? And of course, you feel the need most when things are not going well. But I think structurally, fundamentally, we need it at some point.
I was going to ask this as a final question, but I'm going to ask it now because of what you've spoken about just now from an institutional reform perspective. If, let's say, after the next general election, regardless of who's the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister says, okay, I want a finance minister who has experience in the corporate sector, who knows, how the government works to a certain degree, and who has publicly committed and spoken about the need for, institutional reform and even political reform. I want to offer that position to you as finance minister, appointed via the senatorship route. What would you say?
I'd probably say that I'm not the right person anymore. Right? I think the finance minister needs to be someone much younger, with more energy, and maybe more attuned to the current ways of the world. I think that question was asked of me
10 years ago?
15 years ago, then definitely I'd say, I'd be a very good finance minister. But 15 years ago, I couldn't be CFO when my brother is CEO.
Yes.
That wasn't going to happen.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think my time has passed, I would think.
Final thoughts in terms of your own maybe advice to the younger generation with regards to Tun Razak's leadership style and your own leadership style as well, because I think you've also evolved with the times as well. Any words of advice to the listeners?
Well, sure. As I said at the beginning, one of the most powerful things is understanding yourself, right? And that's how you kind of mitigate your weaknesses and double down on your strength. I think that's extremely important. I think the right value system in terms of honesty, integrity is essential. I think communicating with empathy. Too many people just communicate. They don't understand the listener or the audience. I think that's another thing I would say. Commitment to service as Malaysians, I think is something we must all remember, not forget. I think many Malaysians ask me, should I come home, right, after their studies? And I think it's fine. Go and develop yourself further, work experience abroad, etc. But you must think of coming back and contributing to the nation. And contributing to the nation doesn't mean going to government, going to politics, right? There's many ways you can contribute. We talked earlier about, my sister-in-law, Tini, who does an incredible job with her NGO work. There are many ways you can contribute, and never feel that you need to do big things to make a difference. Small things can make a difference. Philanthropy, sometimes you look at some of these causes, it was like black hole, right? You just can't give enough. But actually you focus on just doing your bit for one person even, or two persons, or three persons. It's enough. You're changing, a few people's lives. And I think that matters.
Yeah. What you're doing now with regards to financial literacy, I think that's also a public service. Done in a way that's financially sustainable.
Yeah. I always believe in 100% charity is never sustainable. Better make it a business model that you can also employ people and also provide service to public, and at the same time sustainable. I think that's very important. Yeah.
This financial literacy is absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial. And it's, but the details of what you teach, right? You need to make sure, that we're getting to the real point, which is, people need to spend within their means.
That's right.
People need to save for the rainy day. People need to save for retirement. These kind of things need to be planned out.
Yes.
And we need to advise the least educated Malaysian how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any final questions for Tan Sri, Peter?
Yeah, I was just wondering to myself, like you spend your life over the years leading a bank. A big part of it, as you mentioned earlier, the offer to be Minister of Finance, if it came 15 years ago, you would have said yes, but your brother was the CEO, you couldn't be the CFO. And now you've entered a very different season of your life where you no more need to toe a line of whether is it a GLC or anything else, and you are Tan Sri Nazir Razak. You are the man yourself. What is for you in this next season, right? How do you see yourself contributing back to the society, doing nation building, which, like I say, I've seen you in many panels talking about it. And how do you envision this next 10 years or 20 years to look like by shaping this new identity of Tan Sri Nazir Razak?
Well, I think, I have a job that pays the bills, which is, I love the private equity business that I'm in. It's investing other people's money across ASEAN in high growth, mid-sized companies. That will continue, I think. Then, obviously, the Tun Razak Foundation is something I have become very committed to, and I think there's a lot we can do in terms of using the Tun Razak legacy to kind of teach leadership for future generation of Malaysians. And relatedly, I'm trying to get funding to redevelop or revitalize the Memorial Tun Razak, which is our old home. And I want it to be a museum of Malaysian socio-political history. So today, if you wanted to kind of understand NEP better, where do you go?
Right.
You cannot, imagine the young, right? The youth, to go somewhere to understand why things are the way they are today, right? And I think we really need that. So that's another project that I'm very committed to. And then I think, offshoots of that will come, and there will be various platforms, etc., where I can talk about using Tun Razak's legacy. And as I said, the NCC2 or the National Reset is a derivative of that. And that's certainly something I will continue to push. And then beyond that, play a lot of golf.
Maybe with my former colleague in Parliament, Tony Phua. Yeah,
He plays too much golf.
yeah, that's a bit of advice for you, Tony. Tan Sri, it's been a pleasure and honor. I think both Peter and I have learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope that our audience also has learned a lot and would appreciate probably at different stages of your life the kind of lessons that Tun Razak and also Tan Sri Nazir can impart on all of us. So with that, thank you very much, and we'll see you back at the Are We OK podcast at time in the future.
Yeah.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
See you.